Dr. David Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's deeply symbolic the way in which this bill has come to the House and the way in which it has landed here, unsure of its heritage and unclear on its passage. The Minister has delivered some rhetoric around the need for change. We all know well the problem of housing speculation in New Zealand, and certainly anyone buying a house in Auckland is well aware of the challenges of getting onto the property ladder for someone on a median income. It is a political measure, and I have to say somewhat cynically timed with a 2-year run-in that ends about the time of the next election. The government will be able to say, if it passes this measure, that it believes it is working but will not know for sure until after the next election. It can say it has acted, but the evidence will not yet be collected on whether or not it is in any way effective. We on this side of the House see it as a rushed and ill-conceived measure. 41% of sales are to property investors worth billions of dollars. And the Minister of Finance has admitted that he does not even know what effect it will have. That is what we're coming to expect from this government, a government that we see more and more often not being straight with New Zealanders, a government that says one thing when New Zealanders know the situation is different. We saw earlier today my colleague Grant Robertson hold up a graph from ANZ about the economy, which saw a deep trough at the end as the graph headed downward. And in fact, the member has it here with us today. He speculated that perhaps the Minister was looking at it upside down because Mr Key had said it was a positive result for New Zealand. So that lack of clarity, that desire to be seen to be doing something when in fact very little is happening. And that is what we are seeing again in this bill, which is designed to look like it is doing something about the rampant property speculation that we are experiencing as a country, about the issue of offshore buyers, and is designed to look like it's doing something when in fact it will do very little at all. It sets up an incentive for property speculators to hold on to a property for 2 years and 1 day, to then on-sell if they wish. It may postpone the effect, but it will not affect land bankers. It will not affect those who are holding land for the purpose of speculative gain over time. It will only affect a small group of people, and it's only designed to affect a small group of people. It's designed to look like it's doing something without doing very much at all. So it does invite property speculators to hold on to their properties and flick them on after 2 years and 1 day. Labor's policy is very clear on this measure. We would require a person to live here or to build a new home so that the supply issue is addressed. In Auckland, we know there are thousands and thousands of families who do not have a home. There are people living in cars and garages, and this government has cynically allowed that situation to continue, creating misery by not addressing the issue of homelessness, of a lack of supply of affordable housing. And here is a measure designed to make it look like they're doing something without really having very much effect at all. We want this government to be straight with New Zealanders. I think New Zealanders are growing tired of rhetoric that is not matched by action. So we know it won't deter the land bankers. We know that it will only capture a small number of buy and flick on property speculators. And the test in this has been made even weaker by Cabinet agreeing to exempt New Zealand residents from providing their ID numbers when buying or selling a house, which opens huge loopholes for people to avoid ever being subject to the tax. It is a bill that is being rushed. It is a bill that the Minister of Finance says he does not know the effect of. It is a bill designed to look like it is doing something from a government that is no longer being straight with New Zealanders, a government that is increasingly out of touch if it thinks that New Zealanders will swallow this hook, line and sinker, if it thinks that New Zealanders will believe that this is going to stop the problem of rampant housing speculation and foreign buyers, particularly in the Auckland market. And Treasury documents show that this measure, this test, is only likely to raise $5 million per year. And the reason it's only likely to raise $5 million per year is because of the high level of avoidance that is anticipated. That's what the Treasury says. The Treasury says it would otherwise gather something like $30 or $40 million a year were it not for the high levels of avoidance that are anticipated. And that is because of a deliberate cabinet decision. And that is the kind of thing we have discovered from this government. A government that deliberately opens up loopholes to protect the interests that it has always protected and will continue to protect. It's a government that wants to be seen to be doing something, but wants to make sure it preserves entrenched interests. It is so out of touch with middle New Zealand, it is not funny anymore. And the government ruled out, in fact, a more comprehensive 3-year test purely on the basis that it could be interpreted as a capital gains tax with an arbitrary cut-off period. They didn't want to actually do anything. They were explicit about the fact they didn't want to do anything. This is a cynical government. It is a government that is out of touch and arrogant enough to even spell out the desire to do nothing and think that New Zealanders will not notice or will not care. Well, the tide is turning. New Zealanders are growing sick of this arrogant, out-of-touch government that brings bills to the House dressed up as action when they cynically are designed, and the Treasury comments, designed not to capture what they are set out to do. The loopholes are opened up so that ordinary New Zealanders are captured, but those who are speculators can walk right through the loopholes. And the government's consultation measure was a farce. The regulatory impact statement showed only 14 submissions were received, 3 opposing and 3 supporting. Look, that's probably 3 phone calls that were made in a rush saying we need some submissions in. We need to be seen to be consulting on this. That's how cynical this government has become. This is an issue that will affect thousands and thousands of Kiwi families who will be without a house, who will be living in cars and garages, and that is how many submissions they received. That was a rushed measure and a farce of a consultation. And of course, we know that the bill will be retrospective as a consequence of the government rushing it through. We know that by the time it's finally passed through the House, it will be retrospective because it comes into play on the 1st of October, as I said, about 2 years before the next election, a period long enough for the government to be able to say that it's doing something without evidence yet being collected to assess whether the measure is effective in any way whatsoever. We know, of course, that overseas countries have measures in place to stop property speculation. We know that in China, you can't buy land at all as someone who's not resident. We know that in Singapore, they have taxation measures to ensure that people cannot buy without as an overseas person without paying an additional sum of money. We know in parts of Australia that they have the policy that the Labor Party has that you must be resident or build a new house rather than purchase one that's existing and deprive a resident family of a house in a constrained supply environment. So we in Labor will support this bill to Select Committee. It is a half measure. We believe it could be improved in the Select Committee, and we will seek to do that. We will seek to work constructively because these are serious issues that need to be addressed, and New Zealanders are sick of a government that is arrogant enough to bring legislation to the House with such big loopholes, with rhetoric wrapped around, but we know that the issue is serious enough that it needs to be looked at properly in Select Committee, addressed, improved, and hopefully brought through this Parliament in a way that actually has an effect and starts to address the problems in New Zealand that we have because of the housing crisis that this government in 7 long years has done nothing to address.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. David Bennett.